Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
I am most pleased to welcome you to the 31st year of the North Idaho College Public Forum. It's a very long time to be on the air, and we're so grateful to the PBS stations in Washington, Idaho that have given us this opportunity, and we so look forward to being with you this 31st year. As our regular viewers can see, we have a new set, and I want to thank our executive producer, Andy Finney, and our director of productions, Jeff Crow. They're responsible for such professional and beautiful set, and it gives us energy to commence another year. On September the 11th, in remembering that terrible, terrible crime that took place in which so many people died in New York and Pennsylvania and Washington, D.C., we had on our campus a very, very qualified man to discuss how you deal with trauma, and we taped these programs at that time when we were so very, very fortunate to have him both this week and again next week, which we're airing here in October. I welcome to the program Barry Richards. Our guest is a former combat Marine and police officer, two fields that regularly are exposed to trauma. Our guest also has pioneered in the healthcare field as to strategies for dealing with trauma as a licensed psychotherapist with a master's degree in social work. Our guest has been a member of a hospital trauma team, an emergency medical technician, a client service director, and a rehabilitation workshop, a child protective service investigator, and is in private practice. Our guest for over 25 years has dealt with this very important subject. Mr. Richards, welcome to our program. We're so pleased that you could be here both this week and next week.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here with you today.
And I want to welcome back Janelle Burke, our regular panelist. And Janelle, it's so nice to have you here for another year. And
yes.
I believe, if I am correct, of our 31 years, this is starting your 29th year. And so it's so great that you've been so dedicated to our program so very long.
Thank you, Tony, and it's a pleasure to be back with this beautiful set, and we're going to have a great year.
And I would invite, as always, Janelle Burke to commence the questions with our distinguished guest.
Well, Mr. Richards, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your background, but Tony's covered quite a bit of that, so let's just leap right into this business of sudden trauma. You've written a book called Sudden Trauma: When Life Will Never Be the Same Again, and it's a very interesting book. I've had the pleasure of reading it, and it is very informative. But let's talk about one of the things that you mentioned right up front, how important it is to start right away with dealing with this trauma. When something happens that is a traumatic event in someone's life, it's important to start right away. Can you address that issue?
I can indeed. Just like the ABCs of physical response to injuries physically, we have ABCs to the emotional wounds emotionally. And if we provide an immediate understanding of what is going on, or as we say in the business, I'm blocking here just a second, I'm sorry.
You might have a follow-up with the other question.
Well, my question had to do with the initial reactions to that kind of traumatic thing. And it's not just the person who's injured, but it's their whole family, their whole support group that needs to immediately take action.
It is indeed. No one suffers a trauma by themselves. They must be attended to by those who care about them their very most. They become secondary trauma survivors to the person who experienced the physical injury or something that they witnessed that was so horrifying at that point in time.
And it doesn't necessarily need to be just a physical thing. It can be any kind of emotional upheaval or trauma.
It does indeed, Janelle. We all carry a history with us, and some of the things that we have not resolved are dissolving our ability and a capacity to function very effectively. So it can be the tip of the iceberg. We've talked about the cumulative effect of crisis incidents that have not been resolved effectively. So we go from bad to worse, and that very either major thing or a very minor thing can trigger a whole avalanche of feelings.
And if someone's there right at the very beginning of this trauma to begin dealing with it, it helps the person to feel much more at ease. Is that correct?
Exactly right. They're getting information that is vital to their understanding. Inside of 72 hours are the window of opportunity, like the shock trauma resuscitation people are most receptive and open because they don't like the pain and the upheaval that their life is going through. So you give them specific, structured, uniform information, and they immediately connect with you and seek more information. It brings that crisis level of intensity way down.
Mr. Richards, you've had tremendous experiences, and I know with this awful, awful crime that took place on September the 11th, one of the companies that lost so many of their people was the Morgan Stanley brokerage firm. They also have offices in Salt Lake City, so you were brought in intervention with the employees in Salt Lake City. Some of them were even on the phone with their colleagues in New York when that crime took place. You also have worked with families where a child's been kidnapped. You've worked dealing with deaths and accidents. I mean, the list goes on. And your book, co-authored by others, has been used by a family in Columbine and so forth. So, and we're going to deal with that in more detail on this in the next show. But I just wanted the audience to understand that you have really been on the front line. And with that in mind, I'd like to ask you to spend some time on discussing when these kind of tragedies happen in people's life. And I believe you have a statistic how often that happens a day in the lives of people in this country. There is that first reaction by some individuals and some families, I am strong, I don't need any help, I'll get through this by myself. How do you deal with those kind of situations versus those that immediately need emotional support? My very involved question is that when someone is physically injured, they get treatment immediately, but oftentimes do not get emotional support. Would you just kind of give us a profile of the different kinds of people and how you can work through that with them?
First of all, clinical traumatology is the healthcare educational therapeutic process of stretching the mind and illuminating a person's understanding immediately when they're receptive to that information. I start off a little bit clumsy. We talk about the bedrock principles of recovery, and that is A, survival is only the beginning. B, learning means less suffering. And C, the earlier you gain that information, the more quickly you can expect to recover steadily from that traumatic upheaval. So clinical traumatology is addressing things from a proactive, preventive standpoint, kind of like pulling the sliver out of the wound very, very fast and then providing information that is essential. Now we do that through an assessment process which could be integrated into any triage possible in the world. Nurses can do it inside of 5 minutes, and they can determine right up front how urgent it will be for an individual to be responded to with more intense therapeutic education to assist them in resolving the upheaval that is going to lead them from bad to worse consequences.
Also, when you're dealing oftentimes with someone who has had an incredibly traumatic experience, a sudden death in the family, or like these tragedies at Oklahoma City where the murder took place and all the people died at the federal building, or in New York and Washington, D.C. and Pennsylvania, whether it be at one person in your family or that, in addition to the particular individual that may be either injured or die, there is a very significant number of people around that are affected. So would you talk to that issue? In other words, if you're dealing with a client and only that client, isn't that a problem in relation to the rest of the family or other the caregivers in relation to
You're
the
right,
victim?
Tony. Nobody suffers trauma by themselves.
Okay.
There is always a caregiver or a loved one or a family member, someone that cares about them, that knows about them, that is most interested in their well-being. So in the assessment process and in the information provision process, it includes everyone and all people that will be involved in their lives. And we can even pull in employers and the insurance company and the risk managers. They all get connected to the significance of that particular trauma in their lives.
Mm-hmm. Janelle Burke.
Last round of questioning, we talked a little bit about the importance of getting to things early. But one of the steps in getting to things early is that so often people feel isolated and they don't know, the fear of the unknown. And you talk a great deal about education and about being honest with the person about their situation. If let's say it's been a car accident and one person survives and another person is killed, that still is very important information to them. They're going to be wondering about it, aren't they? And how do you deal with that?
The one person that's not killed, and
yes,
the proactivity is the key to the situation. You must immediately after any significant physical injury get to that person and provide them a way of understanding what they're going through and the stages of recovery and their survival realities and these bedrock principles. And it's an amazing thing how open they are to receiving that information immediately.
They want to know. They would rather know than not know. Is that correct?
Inside of those 72-hour magic minutes, they are definitely interested in finding out because they're hurting. They don't want to go through that process very long.
Now, in your book, you also talk about going back to the site of the accident. When something has happened, sometimes it's very helpful to go back to where that happened. And that is an important part, too, of the healing process.
Oh, it is indeed. If we can do that all in 72 hours, the resolution of the major trauma is reduced by 75% in most cases.
Now, sometimes you can't go back to the scene, of course, because you may be injured to a point that you can't go back to the scene, or you may, say, for example, a survivor who isn't at the scene, maybe far distant. They may not be able to get there, but still it's important to go back at some point in time, isn't it?
Oh, yes. I had in the book, the crash victim, the airplane crash victim, it had been 3 years before he, since his plane crash on the top of a mountain in Elko, Nevada. And we worked with the airlines company, we worked with the employer, we worked with the entire family, the wife and children, and we indeed went through a progressive, what is called desensitization process to get him to the airport, to get him to sit on an airline, to get him to taxi around the tarmac, to get him up and fly around the valley of Salt Lake City, and then eventually to get on the same kind of aircraft and travel over and across the very area that he crashed that airplane in. And once that was done, it's the empowerment that I can do that. And this particular fellow was a pilot himself. And so it gave him a great sense of accomplishment and achievement. But it wouldn't have come without the stretching of the mind and the illuminating the understanding that typically cause people to feel like they're going crazy. As a matter of fact, his uncle was an initial client to me, and he recommended that this young man come in just before he was ready to check himself into a psychiatric hospital. And he came in, and within 2 hours, he was adjusted to the fact that he was moving onward and upward, taking those steps to recover from this that was dissolving his marriage.
Now, in this case, and this is an interesting one to talk about, because in that case, if I recall correctly the facts, he didn't actually suffer a great deal of physical injury himself. It was more an emotional injury than it was a physical injury. He wasn't injured in the crash itself, but physically or emotionally, as time went by, he became more and more injured. Is that
You're
correct?
Absolutely
and
right.
So that can happen oftentimes with people. They may not think it's as traumatic as it actually turns out to be. Is that correct?
You're absolutely right. And as you read in the book, he was congratulated for getting through the experience. But nobody goes through a physical injury without some emotional wounding. And if you come home from an accident like that and your wife meets you and your children, they don't know what's going on in your head. And they're the blind leading the blind, trying to get you through that forest and trees. And it's very painful because you don't know what to say, you don't know what to do. You're very protective and guarded from not revealing these things that are painful to you.
We have about 14 minutes left on this show, and I don't even want to go to the second show without getting through something extremely vital in your book. And then, of course, we'll have more details next week. I particularly want to ask this question on behalf of counselors and psychotherapists and those who work as you do, and I think you're really pioneering something very important. To try to assist the individual and those around the individual or the whole family or friends in these traumatic experiences, you have come up with a 5-step process that you use and you urge others to use, and also incorporates members of the family because they have to be part of the 5-step process to be the supporters. So if you'd be so kind as to take some time for this audience, and particularly our professionals who are watching, to say what is the 5-step process in dealing with trying to heal in relation to traumatic experiences.
Yes, Tony, they're very, very simple. The steps are, number one, get the facts. And as I mentioned earlier, it's the ABCs. You know, survival is only the beginning, learning means less suffering, and the sooner you get that information, the better off you'll be. There are other specific amounts of information that is, as soon as they get that information, they feel that there is a structured, supportive, secure situation where it's not just a free-floating amount of information.
So
it's
that information covers a lot of things. First of all, the medical field has responsibility to tell the individual about what the physical condition is and what they may need to do. And so forth.
Exactly right. And just as ever ready are the steps and procedures for taking care of a physical injury, if you let them know that there are emotional injuries that accompany that and give them that specific information, they're going to be much more cooperative
so both
and
those
responsive.
need to come on at the same time.
Absolutely. From our position, they need to come on with prescription because most people will play down or subordinate the importance of those emotional wounds being attended to effectively.
So there are a lot of facts to be discovered in these cases.
Precisely, yes. There's 200 terms that we reference and talk about in the specific facts that we give, and there's tutorial directions that really upgrade a person's way of thinking and reasoning about the way they can be helped the most by the medical and health care professionals that are out there to help them.
And I assume close people, a spouse or parents, they're involved, if it's real in its most maximum successful way, they're involved even in the fact process too.
We do not do any work ideally without a spouse or a loved one or a family or friend because they're all going through a traumatic experience, and if they're talking a different language and not knowing what it is that they're dealing with, then you're adding some problems to the situation. So get the facts is the first and very, very vital in part of the process. The second one is be upfront and forthright about feelings and emotions and concerns. Saying what you mean and meaning what you say. Being able to get to what's really the most concerning to a person. And that's just critical so that the feelings don't eat them alive. We have a lot of situations where people don't know how to say what they need to say, so they don't say it. And people look at them and they look fine and they assume they are fine. And maybe the person even says they are fine. But as a matter of fact, they are somewhat the walking wounded and accidents looking for a place to happen unless you render that area of confusion and difficulty better.
So counselors and psychotherapists now are so trained that you don't take serious always the fact that the person says, no, I'm fine, I don't need any help. You have to go below that surface oftentimes to find what the problem in this step two.
Indeed, and what counselors and psychiatrists and psychotherapists need to be aware of is that proactive principle and that preventative aspect in letting people know what it is that inhibits their willingness to talk about what it is. And we've talked about alexithymia and phlegmatics. Alexithymia is a term that is used to describe a person's reluctance, inability to, or unableness to talk about what they're feeling. They've grown up in a programmed sense of not sharing their feelings with other people. And the other thing is phlegmatics, which is an atypical behavior. And the example I often give is one where a gentleman severs 3 fingers of his hand and nearly the 4th finger, and he gets to my office, and as I ask him to describe, after some rapport establishment, what it is that happened to him, he started laughing about cutting these fingers off. Well, his whole career was being threatened because he was a blue-collar worker and he needed those fingers to manipulate things. So it is be upfront and forthright about feelings and emotions as the second simple step.
Thank you. Number 3 now.
The third simple step is develop essential support systems. And I think I might have got those in the wrong order, but essential support systems is those that are nearest and dearest to us, those that care about us the most, those that are invested in us the most, those who have the most to gain by learning how to respond to their needs, because it's their needs that are going to be responded to too. So the development of essential support systems is critical. The fourth simple
Can I
step.
just, for a
you
moment,
bet.
on the third one, again, it doesn't matter that much probably which order they go in because
Probably
they're all
not.
essential.
Yes.
But oftentimes an individual that is in this traumatic experience doesn't want, they say, to burden other members of the family. That's a really bad mistake, isn't it?
It is indeed.
Then the family have, or don't they have to take an active role to say, yeah, we want to be involved?
As they learn and get the basic facts, they know that the more they know, the more they will enable a person, or the family, the more the support system knows, the better off that they'll be as a result of that information sharing. They'll be able to communicate more effectively.
Sure. Number 4.
Number 4 is, let me see here if I can remember it right. It's take informed action. And that informed action is basically a matter of realizing that we have a history that goes along with all of us. And we have to have a basic faith and trust in a system that can help us deal with that history more effectively. Not too long ago, I should say, very recently, Mayor Rudy Giuliani of New York City said this. He said, the first thing you have to do is to believe. You have to have a philosophy or religion. If you can get back to that, you can get through anything. So the first and foremost necessity of survivors or sufferers and caregivers is to acknowledge the source of light and truth in their life to get them through this process, and then to trust in that source of light and truth. And there's a scripture that's out there in the Old Testament that promises that they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They'll mount up with wings as eagles, and they'll run and not be weary, and walk and not faint. Then you have to have a person acknowledge the upheaval as an event, not life itself. And following that, you need to have them open their mind to receive and process vital information for looking at the future and their process of healing through that process, and then be willing to take those steps in the process of healing and getting over the traumatic upheaval that they had, and trust in the good that will come out of it.
So there, like a lot of things in life, there is a framework from which, if they have that, action can be so much more constructive than if they're in some kind of, I guess, twilight zone or abstractness, not understanding the purpose of life for them.
Uniform, structured, precise information is what holds people together. We go to work every day because there's structure there. We have a home environment because there's structure there. In the upheaval of a traumatic experience, we need more structure than ever before. Mm-hmm. So we provide them that structure, and provide it on a routine basis, and repetitiously reinforce what they've learned, and they move ahead with the recovery process. Incidentally, in most cases, inside of 30 days. Dependent upon the extent of injuries that they've experienced.
And then last in this process?
The last simple step is pay the price and reap the rewards. And that means that we know that life upheaval and the changing of our circumstances, which will never be the same again, will, number one, require some soul searching to see just precisely what kind of things they believe and think and assume are true, and upgrading that process so that they can heal more effectively. So they search the soul, and then they have to discover, you might say, self-defeating ways of reasoning and believing that can get in the way of their healing process. They have to face their fears.
Like the airplane pilot?
That's exactly right. And then they go from there to trusting in that process of healing and exercising their mind so that it relieves itself of the impact of that trauma.
I think right now would be a great time to have an example that you've given, and we've all heard on TV, one of the great heroes when the plane went down in Pennsylvania, when those great heroes decided they would not allow that plane. They knew they were going to die, and they were not going to allow that plane to come to Washington, D.C. and destroy more. The spouse of one of those heroes has done a remarkable job. When trauma results in a family member dying, then of course she, like in her case and others, they have to deal with that. And I think that what you talked about today has to do with step 5, all these other things too, but taking action, getting purpose out of even some awful experience you have. Would you share that story about the wonderful wife who has dealt with her husband that she's on the phone with? when the plane went down in Pennsylvania.
Actually, the operator was on the phone with
that was
with
the operator. And shared it with him.
It's Todd M. Beamer, and it's the famous United Flight 93 dialogue between the phone operator,
yes.
and she dialogued with him, and she then overheard these last words, "Let's roll." And that galvanized the nation in its darkest hours. To get through the situation, we have to take action and do something. And one of the greatest remedies for suffering from healing is getting involved in serviceable activity, kind of losing your life and getting it. And what you give, you get back. And so she's gone into community service, Lisa Beamer, the widow, and acted as a wonderful role model for lots of people not to agonize endlessly about what will never be the same again and what is so irreversible at this time.
Making his life so meaningful, which it was, and for example, what he and others may have done, they may have saved the Capitol building, in fact, and members of Congress. What a contribution he made to democracy. And so as she's working through this and helping people, that can give her purpose and her children purpose too. So I really see that tied so much to your point number 5, and that's why I wanted to have some emphasis.
Yeah, in the book Sudden Trauma, When Life Will Never Be the Same Again, each one of those first-person accounts is what we call a memorialization process, and they outline the things that they learned and how they overcame what they had to overcome. And that becomes something that other trauma survivors identify with and say, I can do that, I had a similar experience. And then they get together and they deal with the common sense of closeness and been there, done that, felt what it's like kind of a situation, so that they no longer feel alone and isolated, insulated. The more people we gather around us and the more interaction there is, the more energy is developed, psychological, mental, spiritual, and that just enables us to get beyond that wounding process.
On that note, I'd bring the permanent conclusion. Barry Richards, you've been so informative, and I know our viewers have been helped, and professionals that will work with. You have very simple processes which are so crucial and helpful. The good news for us is that you'll be back next week, and we'll go into more detail, and we'll also do some more case studies that could be helpful to our viewers. Thank you for being here today. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jolene. It's been a pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, as I've indicated, this is our beginning of our 31st year, and we're so pleased to be back with you for another year, and we're so grateful to Barry Richards to talk about how you deal with trauma, which is certainly a part of life, and unfortunately, we wished it wasn't so often, but it is, and it's part of what we have to deal with. I would like to invite all of you to be back with us again next week when Barry Richards will be back as our guest, talking again about how to combat trauma and how to deal with it. I hope that you will be with us that time. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station. Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
Last week on our first program of the 31st year, our guest was Barry Richards, and we're very pleased to have him back again this week. And for you who were not with us last week, may I give you a little of his background. He is an expert on traumatic experiences and how you deal with individuals who have gone through these awful, awful experiences. He is a former combat Marine and police officer, two fields that certainly are and continue to be exposed to trauma situations. Our guest has gone on to pioneer healthcare strategies for dealing with trauma as a licensed psychotherapist with a master's degree in social work. Our guest has been a member of a hospital trauma team and an emergency medical technician, a client services director in a rehabilitation workshop, a child protective service investigator in Utah, and as in private practice. He's been working and experiencing with all of these types of challenges for over 25 years. If I may call you Barry, welcome back, and you're so informative, and we've had you on our campus to speak in relation to that awful crime of 9/11, and while here taping these programs for airing in October. So Barry, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. It's nice to be back with you again today, Jolene.
As always, Janelle, it's such a pleasure having you as a regular panelist, and as always, we will invite you to commence the questioning.
Thank you, Tony. It's a pleasure to have you back this week, and we really enjoyed talking with you last week about the whole process of trauma. We think it would be very helpful for a lot of our viewers. You have written a book called Sudden Trauma, When Life Will Never Be the Same Again. And you've pointed out that in many, many lives throughout the United States, for one reason or another, people have to deal with a sudden trauma. And you also, last week, dealt with 5 steps. And just to start the show today, I kind of want to review those 5 steps that you talked about last time. The first step, if you can indicate to our viewers, and just very briefly so that we have a good setting for this week's program.
Let's get the facts. The ABCs of recovery from a traumatic experience.
And the second step is to
be forthright about emotions and feelings.
Let people know what you're thinking and what you're feeling, that's important.
Saying what you mean and meaning what you say.
And the third step is
develop essential support systems.
And this can include all your family and your friends, your employer. It can include
those that are nearest and dearest to you, that have the greatest investment in your recovery well-being.
And the fourth step is to
take informed action. After you've acquired information in that get the facts basis, then you can start applying that information to your personal life.
And the fifth step is to
pay the price, reap the rewards.
And that's when you talk about, let's make something of this. Let's turn this sow's ear into something of a silk purse.
The silver lining in the clouds, that's exactly right. So much good can come out of so much bad for the benefit of not only the walking wounded that becomes a thriver instead of a survivor, but for those that admire that process and are benefited from their experience and how they made it through.
Well, that's a great start to explaining to our viewers what the program is going to be about. And then I have a question now, and that has to do with reconciliation. In your book, you talk about how important it is for people to reconcile with whoever might have hurt them or they might have hurt. It works both ways. It's important for the person who hurt someone to reconcile with them. It's important for the person who is hurt to reconcile as well. Can you explain why that's important?
Adversarial, intense feelings are like salt in the wound. And when you want to heal fast, you don't have that added discomfort of salt in the wounds. So you do your very best to ameliorate that by giving people the opportunity to make contact with the person that may have been involved in the accident. That can be an employer, that can be a person who's involved in an automobile accident, that ran into your car, or whatever the situation may be. Making peace brings so much health and well-being to an individual.
And we know that that's a very important thing in lives in general, is to let go of that baggage.
It is indeed. If you don't, it's feelings buried alive never die, and it's not what you eat, but what eats you.
On the program last week, you talked about the first 72 hours being a very crucial time, and I'm not going to go back and repeating that, but in your book, one of the very impressive things is that people who've gone through some experiences were so generous to allow their names to be used in their case studies. And that's one of the reasons I recommend the book, is that it's very helpful. I think anyone who's going through a particular problem, it's helpful to see what someone else has done in similar situations. And I'm thinking of an example in your book where one young boy at age 11 went through an experience when he lost his father and his mother and his sister in a car accident that he was in. And yet 40 years later, he had not dealt with that. until there was an intervention. And so I want to leave with the viewers. I'm sure we have many viewers out there, and they may be saying, but I didn't deal with it in the first 72 hours. It's been 10 years or 20 years.
That's
but
right.
give them hope, because in your book you do that about, obviously it'd be better if it could have been then, but since it can't be, how to deal with it, and shouldn't they deal with it, even though it's been maybe eating at them and has affected all their relationships and their happiness over all these years, and the guilt that's been there.
That's right, Tony, and I would like to give all our viewers the acknowledgement that, yeah, you can take care of a trauma 40 years out or 60 years out. We go from the basis of that old aphorism that the mind once stretched with new information never goes back to its original dimensions or way of looking things or perspectives. As soon as they get those ABCs, as soon as they learn about how important it is to connect family members, then they are in the modern vernacular upgrading their thought processes, their ability to see and reason and do things differently, so they're not continually shooting themselves in the foot and having problems endlessly mushroom out of control for them.
I have a tendency to forget things, and I'm going to go into some of the points that you have there, but I might forget at the end of the show. Our viewers are such wonderful people who like to follow up with more studies, and they may want to go to your website to gather more information. So would you give that before I forget, please?
Our website is www.5simplesteps.com.
Thank you. That could be helpful.
Thank you.
And Janelle will deal with this part, but I want to start with, before you there, you have a number of do's and don'ts. And so would you, and there's 3 different sets, and I don't really prefer to identify which one, but would you take one of those, maybe to your left there, and talk about what should and should not be done, and identify it for us?
Well, we commonly look at things that survivors start to think and do without information, which can be very, very distressing to them down the road a ways. And so we have the sufferer saying or doing things that, if they were cautioned about, would prevent a lot of problems. And then we have don'ts for the comforters and the sufferers, and we have do's, and that's always the affirmation of their ability to be in charge and to have self-initiative and have progressive recovery rather than delayed recovery and problematic healing. We have to look at things very realistically and say we don't want to make hasty assumptions about limitations for progress. People are amazing at adaptions and in compensations for losses and things like that. And yet never want to assume that everything is going to be fine concerning the future. And we can get into a simple little statement about fine. If we assume people know how we're feeling, and we say, I'm fine, that is an acronym that we've come up with, is F for frustrated, I for insecure, N for neurotic, and E for emotional. And by saying we're fine or conveying that message out there, it causes people to assume everything's fine, and that person then feels abandoned and neglected.
They're trying to send you a message, but it's not the message that you're often getting, and that's why your comments just now say intervention.
Proactive intervention and prevention of the mistakes that are made by not being aware of what you need to say and do in the aftermath of a trauma very early in the process, because things cascade or mushroom out of control. Once you feel like you've been abandoned or neglected, you assume things, and it goes from bad to worse.
Would you continue with this?
You bet. Don'ts for comforters and sufferers.
Right.
Don't underestimate the power of your loving concern and your example of fortitude and stamina and determination in the process of healing. Don't assume trauma, well, we've covered that one. Don't expect that everything will be returning to normal. One of the survival realities is that life will never be the same again.
Which, although the tendency is to want it to be.
Exactly right. And you got to know that complete recovery is both physical and emotional, and the earliest response to emotional wounds is just as important as medical response to a physical injury. For a comforter, you don't want to ask for vivid details off the bat. You establish a rapport and a comfort level with people, and if they want to tell you, and that'll be an indication of their healing process in recovery and well-being, they can then start discussing what they've learned and how they've applied it to their healing process, and they won't become emotionally distraught and trigger avalanches of feelings coming back. There's some specific do's for caregivers
Please.
and loved ones. Encourage the survivor's recovery by recognizing and acknowledging daily progress. And that's just being willing to get out and do things and talk and not bury their feelings to where it causes problems, even if those things may seem small or insignificant to you. And that the degree of injury and incapacitation is correlated to that. People need bit by bit reinforcement to what they're going through. I think that comforters and those that are attending to them, and remember, they're going through their own suffering experience, and they are a sufferer too, so they have to be aware of these do's and don'ts. They've got to expect sudden changes in moods and temperament. When something doesn't go the way it's supposed to, you go to the doctor's office and they're expecting this. If it doesn't go that way, you've got to be stable and secure and steady in your reinforcement and your encouragement. Encourage and support the sufferer in developing higher levels of independency and self-sufficiency. We know that if we're too helpful, it might make the sufferer feel helpless, and that can aggravate and intensify problems for the healing process.
So it's like a lot of other things. It is really a challenge. It's a balancing act, and I assume that may vary some from person to person that's gone through, like a sufferer. That everybody does not respond or act exactly the same way.
No two people recover exactly the same from any identical trauma, and you cannot predict with any degree of certainty how long it will take a person to suffer. But when you upgrade in that computer language their understanding and awareness, and they have the same language to talk, then you don't get those error messages coming up and terminate the communication that is so vital. It's like an infusion of love. We talk about physical trauma and the need for a blood transfusion, and often we need the transfusion of a anti-shock lactated ringers or something like that. In the recovery process, we need loved ones to be there that care about us the very most. That's cross-typed and matched loved ones, the ones that are nearest and dearest, the people that care about us the most, and we need the information that is essential to imbue them with a healthy well-being or recovery outlook.
Thank you. Janelle Burke.
I think in the do's and don'ts you said, don't tell people everything is going to be okay if it isn't going to be okay. That was one of the messages that you have in
You're right.
in the book.
There's an example that I use that I picked up on when I was on the trauma team at the hospital, and that was that paramedics doing an excellent job of saving life and bringing this gentleman to the hospital for attention knew what plastic surgeons could do in reconstruction and enabling this man to get through the shock and trauma of an acetylene blow-up in his face, which burned his face quite severely. And so there were some observations that everything's going to be okay. The fact of the matter was the man was getting married 2 days later. He was going to be hospitalized, and there are various other things. People have what appears to be minor injuries. I had a client that fell and severely avulsed the tip of their fingers, and the doctors in the hospital did the very best they could, and they snipped the tissue of flesh around that wound, and 3 weeks later she was profoundly depressed. They didn't know that gal was a concert violinist and she'd lost the sensitivity to the tip of her finger. So we have to be extremely sensitive to where people are at and evaluate where they're at so we don't add fuel to the fire, so to speak.
Another one of the things that you mention in your book is making sudden changes in your lifestyle, major changes to your life. That's a thing you shouldn't do if you're a survivor, and if you're a caregiver for a survivor, you shouldn't urge them to make those decisions.
That's right. Again, sufferers and comforters are simultaneously comforters and sufferers because they all want to make the right decisions. And what you're referring to there is what we've identified as the rule of thumb, and that is you don't change your employment, you don't change your marital status, you don't change your residency, and you don't make any major financial decisions inside of a year without reasonable professional expertise to help you out in that. Now, I have an ambulance driver that I've been working with who just lost a child to a drowning accident, a 3-year-old child. And at the same time, the ambulance company that she's working with is no longer a viable area of employment, and it's coming to an end. And she questioned me about what she had learned up front in the first 2 or 3 interviews about making a change in her employment. Well, she wants to go to work for a hospital that she has brought in patients to for years. And I said, that would be an ideal place for you to go because they're very sensitive to the trauma that you've gone through. You've got information that will be invaluable to assisting other people. You've been there, you've done that, you've felt what it's like. And that's that service component and resolving things that could very easily dissolve her ability. So with appropriate information, and if you get a settlement with money, the thing you want to do is get an advisor who does structured settlements. A lot of people think that a lot of money is going to make them all well, but there have been studies, one after another, and you may know this as an attorney, that the greenback poultice never ever made anybody well. It's the knowledge, the information, and if they can use that money to augment circumstances to, say, educate themselves in advanced education or stabilize their circumstances, their healing process isn't aggravated by the drain and the stress of financial insecurity.
You mentioned objective advice. That the person they go to needs to be an objective advisor. So you get outside or objective advice as compared to subjective advice from other people who are maybe close to you or have their own interests in your well-being.
That's exactly right. I learned a long time ago that there's a little larceny in everybody, and not to say that people are malicious in that process, but they have an agenda. And so, you want to get an objective piece of direction that doesn't have any connection to the settlement process, I work with attorneys frequently that turn that whole ball of wax over to me. I make a recommendation for a structured settlement financial counselor, and they're out of the loop. So it isn't a unethical or inappropriate recommendation to be made.
Your book was so helpful, and I was reading that same section that Janelle talked about. We all have experiences, and it's nice to have them confirmed. I have a friend in North Carolina, and her and her husband married for over 50 years, and he died suddenly. And they had this beautiful home and spacious area of like 5 acres. And her first reaction was, I'm going to sell this house. I can't live here. And I'm going to go downtown in kind of a low area, that is, geographically it was low, kind of like where you couldn't see out, and get a little house. And I said, promise me one thing, that you will not do this for 1 year. And she took the advice, and she says now that she would never move, that she wants to live there until she dies because it is home. She was doing that during this traumatic experience. And so I just want to give that personal example because it was so nice to see it in your book and to see an example where she is about to make a really bad mistake.
In actuality, most of the information that is reviewed in that book, outside of the traumatic upheaval, is relatively common sense. Now there are some terms and directions, but if people get together, they'll identify with those things, and just a common level of understanding would make that very clear. She's connected to more things in that house that support and sustain her through the healing process.
And it has this great view of everything. If she goes down into this real low area geographically, she couldn't see anywhere.
You're a psychiatrist in the making.
I've never tried to do that. Something else that you did today at a session with counselors that I thought was so important and helpful. I think you had mentioned an example of a bus driver, and they are in traumatic situations where there's an accident. They can see down and see some awful, horrendous things in the accident, and then the guilt comes from that. But what you mentioned that I have not heard before, that on their physical body there's even changes. And would you take them through that the next few days, that they might physically even have some problems, and if they know about that, that can be helpful in moving through those.
Indeed, Tony. This example was where a bus driver had stopped to pick up passengers, and someone came around a corner, plowed into the back of his bus, and was mortally wounded. He watched that whole situation, and it wasn't until the next day that he found out that the lady had perished as a result of that accident. But he was brought directly to my office as a matter of a contractual service to provide that immediate response to need in addressing those emotional wounds. And through a very simple, structured process, we provided him information about what he would physiologically experience. We told him that in terms of his urination, he would have a different a change in color and perhaps an odor. He might become constipated, or he might become diarrhea, that he would probably have difficulty sleeping, sleep disturbances, and phobias, and any number of physical symptoms. And he came in the next morning, and we'd follow up with these early interventions very rapidly to reinforce where a person's at. And he couldn't wait to get through the door to say, everything you said happened. I feel so relieved that I was told what to expect and how to deal with it. And of course his wife was there, and his family was there, and it assisted them in knowing, he's not losing his mind, he's not going crazy. He's just going through a process that is very normal. And that's what our viewers really need to know too, that a reaction is normal to an abnormal situation. We're not losing our mind. We can't go crazy, except in rare circumstances that I know. And you can't have been diagnosed with a psychiatric disorder known as PTSD inside of 30 days. So if you give people information to reduce their symptoms, then inside of 2 to 3 weeks, those symptoms are so much in abeyance, they're so much relieved, that they're on their way to recovery. And I rarely get people, unless they have profound, incapacitating, debilitating accidents that go longer than 60 to 90 days in the process. It's just a very healing catharsis of empowerment and ability.
Just to relieve his mind about these physical changes will help his healing process.
Oh yeah, if
Not
you don't
wondering what it was.
If you don't understand what's going on with your body, you think something's wrong with you.
Yeah.
And it is. It's here, but it's being converted into something physical. And once
Right.
you put this at peace, then you understand the other things are normal, and it's your body just eliminating the intense chemical adjustments that have gone through with all
Sure.
that fear.
Thank you. Janelle Burke.
I want to ask you about some things that are talked about a lot of times, flashbacks. And I have a whole list here of things that are just sort of small topics, but one would be flashbacks. Is it normal to have flashbacks?
Oh, indeed it is. Anything can result in a flashback reaction, and that is like hearing a siren. That is like watching a news report of something, of a criminal action that reminds you of something that happened to you criminally. I was talking to a lady today whose house had been burglarized, and that is one of the most traumatizing experiences that a person can go through. But many people would say, oh, get over it. But the flashback is that if you hear about a burglary, you've been so intruded upon, it's so invasive, it's like they've gotten right next to you and you don't know where they came from and what they're doing. So your heart starts beating a great deal, you might get hot flashes, your hands get cold and clammy, and commonly that you have psychological hallucinations. I remember this one lady who came up to a stop sign, and she came parallel to a group of people in a vehicle that reminded her of who she was mugged by. And she freaked right out, and she started driving through a red light. And so those kinds of things need to be addressed very early inside that first 72 hours, and give them a simple remedy to deal with that, and that is illumination. And don't drive by yourself until you've been able to talk through this situation. And like you were talking in our first show, I believe it was, the in vivo desensitization process, where we go through the stages of the exact injury that a person had, and they process that, and then they can see any number of people that remind them of it, and they'll be able to make that connection in their mind. This is like it, but it's not happening again.
A second thing, suppression of memory. Is it real?
Oh, it is indeed very real. When we don't want to talk about what is causing us a lot of intense feelings, we take the energy that is normally invested in being creative and productive and efficient and problem solving, and we stuff down those feelings about the event. I could say that I came to your program today after leaving home where my wife told me she was going to give me a divorce, where my dog was killed, where my kid's incarcerated, and where I lost my job. But I come to this interview and I'm carrying on very pleasantly. That is a suppression, and people don't want to go there and feel those feelings again, but they have to resolve them, or it will start dissolving. There are relationships in marriage and family and workplace and all that other stuff.
The good news is those things have not happened to you today.
The good news is they're not happening to me, no. Thank you for making that clear, Tony.
Thank you.
PTSD, what does it stand for, and how do you define it?
Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. It means after the trauma, distress is really what it is, because we all deal with stress. It's how it deals with us, and so it becomes a disorder
only after a period of 30 days of sustained symptoms. And the American Psychiatric Association requires that for a person to have that diagnosis, the number one criteria is they must see something that is life-threatening, potentially disfiguring or horrifying happening to themselves or to somebody that is close to them. That doesn't rule out watching 9/11 and having that a lot of people go through that experience. But they have to have 30 days of sustained symptoms in a number of different criteria areas.
And fear, how does fear play into this whole thing?
Fear is the opposite of faith. And information and what you don't know. I mean, after terroristic trauma, it's fear that they capitalize on the absence of information. So if you think you're never going to walk again, or you cannot go down in a certain part of town, or you can't do something in a workplace, that's got to be replaced very quickly by information, so that the emotions that are associated with that do not fester and abscess into psychological scar tissue, which sets up a person into being a very avoidant, resistive, aversive situation.
On that note, let's bring the pertinent conclusion. Janelle, on behalf of Janelle Burke and our staff, Barry Richards, thank you for being with us this past 2 weeks. Your information and your book is most informative. And again, I would say to our viewers that he and others co-authored Sudden Trauma, When Life Will Never Be the Same Again. And that is a very, very helpful book. And on this show, we can't go through all the details in 2 shows. So I would recommend that book for helping those particular professionals who work with people in trauma. Barry Richards, thank you for spending so much time. You've been generous on our campus today, not only in this, but in speech and in meeting with our counselors. Thank you very much.
It's been an honor. Thank you for being here with you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I invite you to be with us again next week, and we'll turn to another subject. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.